Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. We are jam-packed. It is a major recruiting weekend for Georgia. Jeff Sentell will help us preview and profile all of that. Diamond Dogs begin their run. We hope a long one through the NCAA tournament. Regional play begins today. We'll give you a bit of a preview from that. I think really good words from Wes Johnson on that front. Also, major battle lines being drawn over the future of the college football playoff. And much to my happiness, the SEC's coming out fighting. I love all of this. We'll give it to you here coming up in just a little bit. But to begin today, let's do some football on the field. A couple of the areas in which Georgia really needs some improvement. There are at least some growing voices who believe that improvement is quite possible. This is good news. It's a great way to start. We'll begin with it here right now. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
We are in a great mood to kick things off here today. First of all, we just sort of love Summer Fridays. That's a really fun thing. But in addition to that, I just love everything we're going to get a chance to talk about on today's program. Georgia beginning its NCAA tournament run. We're excited about that. A lot of big-time visitors on tap for UGA recruiting. We're excited about that. Frankly, I'm very happy to see the fighting spirit the SEC is showing in the battle over the future of the college football playoff. Believe me, we'll get there here before it's all said and done. But can I also begin with this? You know, we are very much of the belief that Georgia could be in store for a very good 2025 season. And we say that knowing full well that it's still a really tough schedule Georgia's expected to play. That's just the story in the SEC in a way that's frankly not quite as true in the other leagues. Georgia faces a very tough schedule here once again. And there are some areas in which Georgia really needs some significant improvement. And over the course of the last few months, think about all those sort of cold weather months when the college football season seems the longest away that it'll ever be. We spent a lot of time really chronicling all the areas that probably held Georgia back in 2024 and those areas that need to be better if Georgia's going to break through in a big way in 2025. And yet along the way of trying to be as honest and candid as we can about where Georgia needs to get better, we have also said that when you look at the track record for UGA, pretty well established as Kirby Smart goes into his 10th season as head coach here. When you look at all of that, that while there are significant areas for improvement, there is reason to believe that improvement could occur. Let me give you for a moment perhaps the most significant of all. If you look at the most deficient area for Georgia last season, at least based on the stat sheet, you would point to the running game. Georgia was outside the top 100, which is almost unimaginable, but outside the top 100 in rushing yards per game. Now, why that was, well, you can sort of debate and discuss a lot of things. Was that because an offensive line didn't quite play the way we're used to seeing a Georgia offensive line play? Was that because Georgia had a lot of injuries to running backs that could have been, more capable contributors, kind of giving Georgia a little bit more of a presence between the tackles, for instance? There were all kinds of reasons that you maybe could use to sort of describe why Georgia was anemic in that particular category. But one way or another, the facts are Georgia was not good last year with its running game. And yet, knowing that full well, we don't think this situation is static. One of those things that it's going to remain true the way that it was a year ago. There is, I think, room for some change here, and reason that change for the better is entirely possible. And if you don't believe me on this, let me give you people who watch tape and sort of crunch the data and do all kinds of very serious scouting work. Our friends from Pro Football Focus, PFF, not everyone's cup of tea. We sometimes jokingly say that we like Pro Football Focus when their data confirms our priors. We probably don't like it as much when it doesn't. This is maybe an example of the former, where according to Pro Football Focus, that when you look ahead to the 2025 season, Pro Football Focus sees Georgia among its top 10 running back groups for the upcoming year. Now, I want to show you this on the screen here, and I'll tell you that Georgia comes in, I'll say, only at number 8. Now, when it comes to a lot of position groups and a lot of years, we've actually sort of grown to expect Georgia to be better than just 8th best in a lot of different categories. Georgia pretty typically is like almost top 5 across the board, at least in its, kind of national championship era here. So it's a little bit different for us to be, coming here and saying, yay, Georgia's 8th best at the running back position. But when you think about the numbers from a year ago and the issues that Georgia had at that position, honestly, if Georgia really is 8th best in America, I think most of us would take that and run with it. That, all of a sudden now, the levers that would pull for Georgia, the opportunity to be, so much better, I would say that there is a lot of potential unlocked if Georgia really is the 8th best running back group in America. Pro Football Focus says there is. Let me read what they say here about this. This is from Pro Football Focus. Nate Frazier entered Athens with a lot of hype as the number 2 running back recruit from the 2024 class. Strong freshman year. Led the Bulldogs with 671 yards rushing and an 84.2 rushing grade. I don't really know what the grade necessarily means, but that's the stuff that Pro Football Focus is sort of famous for. They go on to say the Bulldogs also picked up. Now listen to this. This is interesting to me. Once again, this is sort of based on Pro Football Focus on their own data, but let's take them somewhat seriously for a moment. The Bulldogs also picked up Illinois' Josh McCray in the transfer portal, who was, now listen to this, this is interesting, I believe, the 7th most valuable Big Ten running back last year, according to Pro Football Focus's win above average metric. Now, let me pause on this just for a moment. I have no idea what a win above average metric is. I have no idea. Couldn't tell you how to tabulate that. But we're going to assume that Pro Football Focus is not making this up out of thin air. I can't really explain it, but we're going to assume this is a real thing. Well, how about this? We've been told for days now, if not weeks, if not months, if not going on 2 years, that the Big Ten is the greatest thing that's ever happened to college football, that the Big Ten is just the capital of college football now, and everything related to the SEC exists in some bygone era in the past tense, that suddenly the Big Ten has completely reinvented football, and history actually began like 18 months ago when Michigan cheated its way to a national championship, and the Big Ten's been on top ever since. So if we take those who are suddenly just so convinced of the Big Ten supremacy seriously, well, Georgia has gotten themselves, according to this wins above average metric, the 7th best running back from the Big Ten a year ago. Now, I say a lot of this, tongue in cheek, but in all seriousness, that description there, I do think gives new voice to just how significant the addition of Josh McCray could be for Georgia. As Smart has already said during this offseason, this is a guy that brings sort of a run between the tackles prowess that I do think that Georgia was probably missing a year ago. Pro Football Focus in this write-up goes on to kind of praise Cash Jones as one of the best receiving backs in college football, and honestly, I believe that's true. This is a guy that a year ago showed he had the ability to get behind a defense. Pro Football Focus ranked him 4th among FBS running backs with an 81.7 receiving grade. That sort of checks out what I feel like our eyes see. This was a guy that did have a penchant for getting open. They conclude by saying Georgia also has a quartet of former 4-star recruits in Roderick Robinson, Chauncey Bowens, Dwight Phillips, and of course, Bo Walker, who there was a lot of talk about back during spring practice. So we're kind of joking about this a little bit, but I do take it as good news that Pro Football Focus sees a Georgia running back room that could be among the best in the country this year. And if that is true, how much does that make the job of Gunnar Stockton as a full season starting quarterback easier for this year? How much does that make the job of Mike Bobo easier this year? Obviously, Bobo's been in the crosshairs for so many Georgia fans. We would say that, and not to make excuses, but it's probably true, that a year ago, with the running game struggling as much as it did, it almost sort of felt like at times Bobo was forced to kind of coach one-handed, that you kind of only had the passing game. And obviously, when you are one-dimensional, you are easier to stop. And look, that's going to come across as excuse-making. I think it at least has to be considered as a possibility, though, for why the Georgia offense was so much worse last year than it had been in the previous year. But honestly, at a certain point, relitigating the past is actually fairly uninteresting. What's more interesting is thinking about how it can be better this year, Pro Football Focus points a direction towards the Georgia running backs as one of the reasons why. How about what Kirby Smart has said about all of this? We'll hear him talk plenty about this when Georgia begins fall camp in a few weeks. But for now, let's go back to the spring practice when Kirby Smart also said he kind of likes a lot about this running back room. The same guys getting lauded by Pro Football Focus. Smart has shared his insight in these guys in the past as well.
Chauncey and Dwight have been great bright spots there. In my opinion, they both are getting better. They're competing. Dwight's hit some big runs. Chauncey's made some really good cuts. Nate's been very consistent. And then, Dylan Bell has taken some reps there. We mixed Dylan in practice to practice. He works in the slot. He's trying to develop as a wide receiver and a back. He's been great and like a good attitude and being committed to, Coach, if it means me playing 10, 15 snaps at back, I want to do it. If I can develop as a slot, I want to do it. So those guys have been good. A couple of the young guys, Micah Bell, Dylan's brother, has done a good job in there getting reps. Wade Penn has done a nice job. So really proud of the way those guys compete and work and take their reps.
So Kirby, in mentioning all that, also mentions Dylan Bell too. Now, Dylan Bell's going to be a receiver. I think he'll still wear a receiver's number, I believe. But this is a guy I think we're led to believe by people who kind of know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody a little closer to this, that Bell this season might be a little bit more ready to be used kind of like he was in 2023, less so like last season when he was kind of exclusively a wide receiver, wanted to showcase that aspect of his skill set. I think now he's a willing participant in Georgia's pursuit of these rushing yards. And when you think about all the creative ways in which he can be used, I think that also becomes really interesting too. So the summertime of year is a time when you can let your mind wander just a bit and your imagination can run wild just a bit. And we're not immune to that either. We like doing that kind of thing. But in this particular case, I don't think this is some sort of outrageous pie-in-the-sky thinking that the Georgia offense needs to be better. The struggles of the running game a year ago are one of the specific areas for improvement. It doesn't require some sort of wild fiction to believe this really could take place, and I would take Pro Football Focus very seriously on that notion. Now, let me shift gears to this just for a moment here. In a couple of minutes, we're going to bring on Jeff Sentell. We're going to talk a lot of UGA recruiting with him. And I was watching Before the Hedges presented by Kroger on Wednesday. I think Kaylee Manziel, Jeff Sentell do such a great job with that show each and every week. And what was really interesting to me, we played a clip from Jeff on this yesterday, but what's really interesting to me is when you look at just the sheer number of official visitors that Georgia's going to have this weekend, I mean, you are, as Jeff kind of pointed out, this sort of weekend after Memorial Day, kind of rolling into the month of June. This is always such a big one for Georgia, and I think we're led to believe that can be true once again here this weekend too. Just massive, massive names rolling in. So let me show you a few of these. Now, I don't have time to go through every single one of these visitors to give you an idea of just how big it is. But nonetheless, these are significant names. For instance, on the screen, if you're watching video, you see Kamari Brooks. We're kind of led to believe that this is a guy, Georgia-Bama battle, visited Georgia so much. Now that it's the official visit weekend, we'll talk to Jeff more about that coming up. Chancellor Campbell's an offensive lineman that seems to have gotten more chatter as of late. That's also an interesting visitor. Kind of rolling on here, speaking of the running back position, Xavier Crowell coming in. That's a guy that you'd like to see Georgia maybe make an impression on. Caden Prothro is that other kind of in-state name. We talk about Mark Bowman all the time, tight end from California. But Prothro as an athlete may be just as impressive, major target for Georgia, a chance to make an impression on him. Guys like Craig Dandridge, the wide receiver out of Cambridge, Peyton Dyer, terrific defensive back from Gwinnett County. These are guys that we've sort of heard more and more chatter about as of late. That's a big-time get. Zyke Hilton, who obviously plays at Carrollton with Georgia's commit from this week. Ryan Mosley, he's coming in. Carter Lucky's the brother of Lawson Lucky. I don't know that you can just rubber stamp Georgia in that recruitment, but once again, another chance to make a big impression on a big name like that. Then guys, kind of out of state like Justice Fitzpatrick, Desmond Green, they are also worth noting too. James Johnson, the defensive line position from down in South Florida, where you sort of see the way in which, kind of the various, usual suspects from an NIL standpoint are sort of stepping up big and kind of, getting involved in this recruitment. The point is there are so many big names, so many guys coming into Georgia here this weekend. And that's what kind of the next month is going to be. We've got our eyes on college baseball. We're going to talk more about that. We are getting ready for the 2025 season. We'll be doing that, each and every day here in this program too. But with Jeff Sentell coming up in a moment and a whole lot in the days to come, just be very much ready for a lot of major recruiting stuff. Georgia already got a great commitment this week in Ryan Mosley. That's a guy that can help Georgia in a number of ways. And we believe what happens this weekend can lay the groundwork for even more commits coming up in the days ahead. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. We're glad you are with us, no matter how you get here, live on video, 10 a.m. across all platforms. That's, Facebook and YouTube and obviously the world-famous DawgNation.com. Radio every day. Not today. We're preempted for Georgia baseball today on 960 The Rep, but we're usually there each and every day. Podcasts, we're there every day. Apple, Spotify. Posting the show still at DawgNation.com too. Every other podcast platform as well. Just thankful that you're finding us, whichever platform works for you. We are glad that it does. And we appreciate our friends at Kroger who make all of this possible for you here today as well. I tell you, they're doing great stuff. And one of the things you want to keep in mind here, in addition to the stuff that you're doing, being a Kroger Boost member and doing all your shopping for all the great cookouts and fun things you have going on this summer, for those other conveniences in life, Kroger's a great option for you on that as well, including the Kroger Pharmacy. They can provide all the services you perhaps need. You can transfer your prescriptions, everything else you possibly need there at your local Kroger. So if you'll check out Kroger Health online, you can find out more about that. The Kroger Pharmacy in store or Kroger Health online. And you can find out more about that and be a part of the great things going on at Kroger. And honestly, you're already doing your shopping at Kroger anyway. That Kroger Pharmacy, a great way to do all of that. All right, so happy to have them as a part of the program. Happy to have you. It's Jeff Sentell here coming up in a few minutes. As I said, we're going to get deep into all of the recruits coming in this weekend, what Georgia's getting in Ryan Mosley. We're going to talk all about that here coming up more in just a moment. Prior to that, though, let's get ready to go around the DawgHouse, presented today by our friends at Zagoria Law. Now, I am in a pretty good mood today. I said that off the top. And one of the reasons I'm in a good mood is I really like what we've heard from the SEC over the course of the last 24 hours or so. I do believe this is a league that kind of understands one of the most important things I think there is to understand in life. In life, you have opposition and you have enemies. And it's important to note the difference between your opposition and your enemy. For instance, Georgia has rivals. Big game coming up against Tennessee. We're going to talk about that later on. Alabama, obviously always kind of a thorn in Georgia's side. Traditional rivals like Florida, Auburn, even outside the SEC, maybe like Georgia Tech. That these rivals, I would say, represent Georgia's opposition. And the SEC, it's the same way. You've got 16 teams in this league. They're all vying to be the best. But ultimately, all they really do is oppose each other. They are opposition. Your enemy, though, is the entity that exists out there that would like to take food off your table and would like to kind of remake the entirety of the sport into something that benefits it more than it benefits you. And in this current arms race of college football, while the SEC teams may be opposition against each other on the field, the actual enemies are the other Power Four leagues, I would say specifically the Big Ten. And I do think it's important to understand. It's one of the reasons why I've been, somewhat critical recently about the, kind of some of the statements that maybe at times Greg Sankey has made. It just sort of seems like, perhaps there hasn't always been, at least publicly in my mind, there hasn't always been the full understanding of the fact that, like, the Big Ten ultimately is out for itself. They don't want to cooperate with you. They may give lip service to that, but I would say they're only trying to convince you to go along with what benefits them. That when it benefited them to kind of align against you in the old alliance days, they were happy to do that. And then the moment that the Big Ten saw their chance to become kind of a Super League too, all of a sudden they were more on your side. But ultimately, no matter what their public posturing might be, the Big Ten is an enemy to the SEC. So is the ACC and the Big 12, but they're frankly just less formidable of a foe than the Big Ten is right now. So what we have seen over the course of the last 24 hours is the SEC, I think, take on a proper fighting spirit when it comes to what the future of the college football playoff might look like. I've told you before, I am not in favor of the kind of 4-4-2-2 model of 4 automatic qualifiers for the Big Ten and the SEC, 2 for the ACC and the Big 12, and then a smattering of at-large after that. I'm not in favor of that because I don't like the idea of these playoff spots are kind of already sort of allocated before the actual competition in the field begins. I'm not in favor of that. However, while I'm not in favor of that specific format, I obviously believe that the SEC in almost every year should have more playoff spots than the other conferences, and certainly far more than the obviously much lesser leagues like the ACC and the Big 12. At times, I don't know the SEC was always fighting as aggressively for this as it should have, but that seems to have really changed over the course of the last 24 hours. I want to show you this on the screen here, coming from Brett McMurphy, who's a national reporter. He works at the Action Network, which is a gambling outfit, but McMurphy's been covering college sports for a long time, ESPN, CBS, things like that. So what he put out on X yesterday is that the SEC provided a 7-page document to all the media. This is the conclusion of the spring meetings this week down in Florida, a 7-page document to the media showing that the, quote, regular season gauntlet that the SEC teams face in league play. The SEC says no other conference has a regular season as grueling as ours. And it goes on to cite all of these like strength of schedule metrics and kind of the analytics stuff that we sometimes talk about, SP+, FPI, Massey Index, things like that. All of this stuff that's more than just basic counting, actual data to sort of show what we read for you on the screen yesterday, which was the SEC has sort of a second tier, kind of a middle group of teams that are essentially playoff contenders in a way that no other league, including the Big Ten, is able to match. That top to bottom, year in, year out, the SEC is just a better league, and it deserves to be treated that way by any playoff format. Now, there is a lot of pushback to this. We're going to talk about this more later on in the show. But the point is, I think the SEC is fighting the good fight right now. That I think it fully understands that these other leagues in a race to create a college football playoff, while they are somewhat partners in that, everybody sort of seeks the most revenue possible, ultimately they are also against you because they want to take playoff spots that rightly should come to you. Now, you say a year ago, well, there was a legitimate argument for keeping out Alabama and keeping out South Carolina and keeping out Ole Miss. I don't necessarily dispute that. But the point I think the SEC is making is there needs to be some consideration given for the fact that who you have to beat, whether you're last year have been a Texas, a Georgia, and a Tennessee, who you have to beat to then be playoff worthy, kind of 10-2. Those were the ranking, the records that got in a year ago. It's just more arduous, more grueling than what the other leagues provide. For instance, to keep the SEC Big Ten comparison going for a moment, the Big Ten a year ago got 4 teams in the playoff when they barely had 4 playoff contenders. We kind of laugh in the face of Indiana. That was always I would say, just a social construct. The idea that Indiana was among the best teams in the country. We laugh at that. But the SEC, which only got 3 teams in the playoff, had like 9 teams that were at least in consideration for a playoff berth. That is a very big difference that needs to be acknowledged, and I'm happy to hear that. I thought it was interesting yesterday, Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner, goes on the Paul Feinbaum show again, and in discussing the notion of future playoff formats, says, this is your, the message that he sometimes hears on the outside is, well, this may be your position, but you may need to compromise for the good of the sport. And what he said on the Feinbaum show yesterday, and I do like this, he said, it may be time for somebody else to compromise. Because frankly, settling for just 4 playoff spots for us would be a compromise based on what we believe we deserve in most years. Now, I'm a pro SEC guy, so it probably doesn't surprise you that I think that Sankey is right on this. And the fact that so many media types very loudly believe he's wrong, frankly, I find their arguments pretty unconvincing. But either way, I'm just glad to see the SEC in the fight in what I believe is a very appropriate way. And kind of as another example of this, when Georgia Athletic Director Josh Brooks spoke the other day at the SEC spring meetings, when the subject of a playoff format came up with him, whether you go, 4 guaranteed spots for the SEC and Big Ten, or what has seemed to kind of gain some steam lately, 5 automatic qualifiers for each of the 5 best conference championship winners, and then 11 at-large selections after that. I love what Josh Brooks said. To me, this is the name of the game. Ultimately, the SEC is now going to fight for what's in its own best interest. This is good from Brooks earlier this week.
Yeah, there's so many being discussed out there right now, right? If you start with the AQ 4 or whatever, then you're guaranteed 4 spots. But then if you look historically, if we move to a 14 or a 16 team, and you look where how many we've got in, I look back to that and I say, I'm not sure I'm always going to want the decision that's going to get the most SEC teams in. No different than basketball or baseball or softball, right? I want to flood it with as many teams as possible from our conference, because that's only not good for our conference, it's good for Georgia, because if there's more opportunities for our conference, and I think if you look at our track record as a conference, we should have a good number between hopefully 5 and 6, and maybe one or more that fall in that criteria in the top 16. So I think you have to look at the historical data as a guiding star for how you make that decision moving forward.
That is what I want from an athletic director. He says, hey, listen, in most years it's 5 or 6. Some years it may be more. That to me is the kind of arguing we should hear on behalf of the SEC going forward. Some of that from Greg Sankey the last day or so, that from Josh Brooks there right there. I think this is an example of figures within the SEC going on the offensive in what I would describe as a very appropriate way. Now, let me also conclude this topic by saying this. I think it was earlier this week I was talking about how the expanded playoff does run the risk of further devaluing the regular season for college football, which I think would be kind of a bad thing. I do think the 12-team playoff this past year, I don't think it quite worked the way that I thought it would. And I have been honest about that I was in favor of the 12-team playoff. Having lived with a 12-team playoff, I didn't think it was that great. Now, I'm also open to the acknowledgement that maybe some of that's just because Georgia didn't advance as far as I would like them to. Maybe this is totally a sort of a self-serving perspective. I'm certainly self-aware enough to acknowledge that as a possibility. But after having said that and then railed on the idea of the 16-team playoff with the 4 automatic bids for the SEC and the Big Ten, there is for me, admittedly, always going to be like a little bit of a siren song around playoff expansion, because I do like the college football playoff. I didn't like the 12-team playoff this year as much as I thought I would, and I kind of have railed on devaluing the regular season, and I do believe that. And yet I'm also just a human. I'm sort of prone to my instincts. Instinctively, I do like the playoff. And after everything that I've said, honestly, I think there's a way the 5 plus 11 could work if we get what Josh Brooks just described. And if we get the kind of mindset that Greg Sankey's also pushing for, where who you play, strength of schedule, recognizing the obvious difference in quality of the various leagues and the teams in those leagues. If we do get something that feels like qualitative analysis, if this is more than just, well, so-and-so's 11-1, so therefore they must be better than this 10-2 team. If we can get something that actually feels qualitative in the analysis, realm, I think 5-11 could still be really fun. Now, I know that I'm on shaky ground on this because I wasn't that happy with the 12-team playoff this past year. I've sort of railed against the 4-4-2-2 model. I think 5 automatic qualifiers plus 11 at-large teams, if you really are seeking the true 16 best teams, which in most years I would say includes far more SEC teams than any other league, including the, new hotness in the Big Ten. If you really did the 5-11 right, I think it could work. I think the problem is very few of us trust the powers that be in college football to get this or really anything else right. And that is Around the DawgHouse. It's presented today by our friends at Zagoria Law. Now, they exist to serve you in a really important situation that it's like any other personal injury situation. If you've been hurt or injured, there's a feeling, well, someone should make me whole here. There's compensation I feel like I deserve. And when it comes to dog bites or being knocked over by a dog, that is what Zagoria Law kind of is there for you. They are experts in this very narrow focus of personal injury law. They literally wrote the book on how to win these types of cases. They're the only law firm in Georgia that specializes people who've been kind of bitten by dogs, injured by dogs, and they can do this for you all across the state of Georgia. So if this is your story, an owner wasn't taking proper care, showing negligence with their dog, it bit you, knocked you over, you created, that created, medical problems for you, pain, suffering. That's what Zagoria Law wants that's who Zagoria Law wants to work with. They want to work with you in this situation. So I want you to give them a call, 833-GA-DOG-BITE, dog spelled conventionally D-O-G, 833-GA-DOG-BITE, or online, ZagoriaLaw.com. Let me also spell that, Z-A-G-O-R-I-A, ZagoriaLaw.com. They are experts in this category of personal injury law. They wrote the book on how to win these types of cases. They want to put that expertise to work for you. So like any other personal injury situation, if you've been injured, if you've been bitten, if you've had pain and suffering, medical bills, things like that, let Zagoria Law fight for the compensation you feel like you deserve. We're, of course, thrilled to have them as a part of Around the DawgHouse here today. Now, before we're done, when it comes to this SEC Big Ten battle, there's actually more out there on that. We'll give you that. Tennessee fans very upset with Georgia, or at least with a situation that involves Georgia. We'll give that to you too. Plus, there could be good news for a former Georgia legend, which I'm thrilled about. And by the way, we'll preview college baseball, Dogs beginning regional play later on this afternoon. So we're jam-packed, but as promised, so much on Georgia recruiting. Big-time official visitors rolling in this weekend. Let's talk about that and a whole lot more here today with Jeff Sentell on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Well, let us say hello to Jeff Sentell. A lot of UGA recruiting talk to get into with him. We gave you the graphic from Before the Hedges a little earlier. It's like 4 pages worth of official visitors. And, Jeff, I want to go through a lot of these, but I did think it was interesting. We played this clip on the show yesterday that for you, long list can kind of be whittled down. The 5-star tight end Caden Prothro, the 4-star edge rusher Kamari Brooks. It sounds like when it comes to those official visitors, those are the 2 this weekend you're watching the most closely. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I mean, you have some others. You have a neat little story in Carter Lucky, the longtime multifaceted Georgia legacy there as well. I think it breaks down. You have they have some pie in the sky recruits, Brandon, coming in. There's a 5-star out of Alabama, a wide receiver who's going to play some 7-on-7 later this summer with Jared Curtis at a national tournament. But if you could say, wave your magic blind, Eddie the Blind Squirrel wand, and Eddie could create 2 commitments, 2 insta commits, if we want to use the language of the EA Sports college football game. If you could make Prothro and Brooks an instant commit, I think there'd be some happy folks in Buttsmere.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And, it's interesting for someone like Brooks, there's obviously a geographic, thing here where he's, very close to the program, visited a lot. Does seem like Bama, I guess, has remained kind of a present factor here in all of this. How much, and sometimes this kind of goes, more broadly than just the particular name. How much of the frequency of visits is related to, well, it's just an easy trip because he, goes to North Oconee High School, which is very, very close to Athens. And how much of this is, well, no, this is kind of a top-level prospect that likes Georgia that much that he wants to be around Georgia as much as he possibly can. How would you kind of decipher that?
Interesting, Brandon. I think Kamari's a guy I'm glad we're talking about because I think if there's one recruit, like we try to do our best we can, but if there's one recruit that probably we need to turn the volume all the way up on, it's probably Kamari Brooks because lots of reasons. David Pollock told us that he's one of the most brilliant people he's ever been around, much less football players. And it's really, Brandon, coming down to Kamari just told me actually yesterday that it's coming down to an Alabama and Georgia kind of tug of war here, steel cage match. Here's a few details. This is the stuff you just love about Kamari Brooks. Yes, he's won 2 state titles in basketball. He's won 1 state title in football. He took over the Class 4A state championship game last year against a really good Marist team. But when you talk to him, Brandon, it's just so intriguing. He estimated he's been to Georgia maybe 20 times now. He might be challenging KJ Bolden or Tyler Atkinson for the unofficial record there during the Kirby Smart era, and really probably all of Georgia recruiting history. But he says there's basically 6 stoplights, man, from his house to the Georgia facility. And when I asked him, what's the main thing, having been there so many times, you want to come away with, he was like, man, he just gave the perfect football guy answer. He's like, I want to walk away from this official visit knowing and absorbing as much as I can about the Georgia scheme, their defense, how the coaches think, how they want to use me, and what my role would be at Georgia. Like, Brandon, he is all about the ball. That's what he cares about. Photo shoot, yeah, maybe a cool album cover that looks like he's in Wuxtry or something like that on downtown Athens. All that would be cool. But for him, he wants to know all the ball. Now, the contender visit will come just next week to Alabama, Brandon. And it's funny, the chief reason when you talk to him about Alabama, one might think it's the tide, the titles, the legacy, all that stuff. For him, it is a great relationship with his primary recruiter, which would be former Georgia linebacker Christian Robinson. So there's a little bit of intrigue there with this recruitment down the stretch.
And then when you mentioned Caden Prothro, we talked about a moment ago. We've lauded Todd Hartley so much, but if Hartley in this cycle could pull a reclassified Mark Bowman and a Caden Prothro, essentially 2 5-stars, top 2 guys at that position, knowing the depth that Georgia sort of already has at the tight end position, honestly, I don't know how many different ways you can say it in terms of the level of dominance that he's showing recruiting at his position. Now, listen, getting both, I guess, is still pretty hard, but I would certainly love to see Georgia get them both because I like them both for I would say, different reasons. It is certainly, fascinating to me that Hartley could have the potential of pulling this double dip, just given the fact that you don't recruit that many tight ends. In a given year, you don't sign that many. It's not like, say, defensive back or offensive line where you're taking a half dozen in every cycle. You just don't go out and get that many. To be able to pull this double dip, if he could do it, I just don't know how you would even quantify the level of success that would signify.
I tried to do it, Brandon, when I was watching his tight end room, and they were working out right in front of us at G-Day. There was an NFL scout nearby, and there was a couple other guys and kind of no ball. And we were like, how many future NFL guys are right here working at tight end for Georgia? And you saw Lucky, you saw Delp, you saw Elias Williams, you saw Ethan Barbour, you saw Jaden Riddell. Brandon, that's amazing. And a couple of those guys will likely move on to the NFL after this season. But I would just say this way, Brandon, those are 4 future NFL starters. If you can add Prothro, Bowman to Ethan Barbour and Elias Williams a year ago. Now, here's the tricky part with Prothro, Brandon. A lot of folks think, I would count myself among them, that he will be a flex hybrid wide receiver where he would flex to the tight end spot and not be a tight end that flexes to the wide receiver spot more often. I think it depends on his weight gain, but that whole receiver portion is getting really interesting, Brandon. Another name I got to bring up is Craig Dandridge out of Cambridge High School. Now, this guy had a monster junior year. He has slick, super film. He's taking his official visit to Georgia this weekend, and I think it's a big one, Brandon, because when James Coley visited when James Coley visited Cambridge and watched Dandridge work out, and this is a guy who has an offer and going to take an official visit at Stanford of all places. So he's got it up there. Coley left that workout basically saying, I got to have him. I got to have him. I got to have him. Kind of like he was a genie rubbing a magic lamp hoping another commitment could come out and kind of manifesting it, Brandon, because the receiver position, Brandon, is going to get interesting because that's why my mind drifted to that when we talked about Prothrow, because I think, man, Georgia views him as at least a split wide receiver tight end right now. And now there's all kinds of that. This is our online chatter for our bingo card on Fridays, Brandon. Vance Spafford, I feel it's going to get harder and harder to keep him in the class. Other schools are going to come after him. So Georgia, even though they got a great receiver this week in Ryan Mosley, it's going to get really harder and harder to retain maybe a guy like Spafford. And that's why a guy like Dandridge becomes more important.
We'll talk to you more about Ryan Mosley here coming up in just a minute. On the visitor list, though, another name that I'm pretty interested in, be curious to know from your perspective how real this is a defensive lineman out of South Florida, and James Johnson. I know there's going to be a lot of competition for him. How much of an opportunity does Georgia have to make an impression with Johnson here this week?
Well, Johnson's a great player, Brandon. He's out of Fort Myers. Now he's moved a little closer down to Dade County in terms of he's playing for a school now that is a traditional kind of hurricane pipeline. He has been prioritized by both Miami and Texas, and that's after this January, earlier this winter, when he visited Georgia. He declared Georgia as his outright leader. So, it's a very intriguing thing right there. And when I see you on the screen, Brandon, I see that faux currency, that $1 million bill or whatever you have in front of you right there. I think that's an example where I think it's going to get pricey for Johnson, especially since Johnson was also rated by On3 as the #1 defensive line prospect in the country. I think this is a big one, Georgia, because I think Georgia has to build up a lot of equity, build up a lot of goodwill and love to be able to hold off these late pushes from these other very NIL-strapped programs. Let's just say it that way.
So before we move on and talk more about Mosley, who committed this week, just give me something else. You've given me a couple of names, I'd say, kind of sort of headline names, a little bit below the fold. Give me something else that sort of stands out to you about the visitor weekend that Georgia's about to have.
Well, first of all, it's massive, Brandon. It's 18 official visitors. Georgia's going to drip in some very intriguing unofficial visitors. They may be in the 2027 class, but Brandon, also very important, June the 1st, Georgia will have camps, because you can have camps in the month of June. And let's be very honest, Brandon, there's some players that are coming in to work out beginning this weekend. And a name that's on my mind is Kenneth Godwin, a linebacker, great connections to Georgia football. His uncle is the running backs coach. The sweat equity check, Coach David Hill, some strong ties there. And he's named Georgia as his leader, but he's going to work out for Georgia early this week. And that, I think, is going to give him, he's got an official visit coming up later this month, but that's going to give him the chance for Georgia to see all they need to see and maybe take his commitment at any time. And aside from the 18, Brandon, which is a whole lot, I kind of deem this weekend is likely the second most important recruiting weekend of this stretch here, including the one that goes back to the May 15th scavenger hunt. But Georgia has 10 guys on the offensive side of the ball coming in, and they have 8 guys on the defensive side of the ball coming in. There's a couple near 5 stars, a couple of players from the state of Alabama. You've got one commitment to Auburn in Devin Carter. You've got one commitment to Alabama in Chris Booker out of Hateville Charter. Love that program. And also you've got one Georgia commitment, just one Georgia commitment this weekend in Jordan Smith, the extremely talented safety out of Warner Robins.
So long list of names that are coming. Could not help but notice there's one name I did not hear you mention. There had been some chatter about this. I guess the fact that the Colquitt County running back Jay Lamar may come this weekend, but that's not on your list. Is there anything – now there is a running back coming in, but it's not Lamar. Is there anything you can tell us about where things stand with Georgia and Jay Lamar right now?
Well, Brendan, it's interesting. He's moved back and forth his dates quite a lot. It was July 3rd, then it was July 4th, and now he set up a June 25th commitment ceremony. I think Georgia and Clemson are there. Like, Lamar's a guy that I know is going to come in either one of the first 2 weeks, maybe that third week. And the third week is the other one to really look at, Brandon, where you've got Mark Bowman coming in. You've got much more of the commitments like Zach Fort, Lincoln Keys, Jared Curtis will be in. So that's kind of it's billing itself right now, and building itself right now is that marquee weekend where it used to be this weekend, Brandon, when like the Gunnar Stocktons and the Arch Mannings, those high priority class value targets would come in for the very first kind of kickoff official visit weekend during this spree in June. But it looks like that weekend in June might be the one that you see a guy like Lamar in. But he's been very purposeful about it. It seems like Clemson, he just took an official visit to Auburn recently, like 2 weeks ago. So it'll be very interesting, especially, Brandon, with all the chatter now about Savion Hyder, the 5-star running back. Can Georgia get back in there with him? And he's kind of trending, or at least looking that way, leaning that way towards Tennessee now. I don't know if you paid attention to this, but Carson Baker, a guy that feels like to me has been maybe a little bit down the board at Georgia, the talented running back at Langston Hughes. He just canceled his official visit to Ohio State. He's leaning Gators right now, man. And he's also canceled an official visit to Clemson recently as well. So,
and Hyder is going to Ohio State this weekend. Is that right? Do I have that right?
That one's been canceled. He's canceled that one as well. So
oh, wow.
He's kind of really circling in. You know, Georgia is a school that's there for him, but I don't know if it's really there for him yet.
Very interesting stuff. Now, Georgia got a big commit this weekend. I really like Ryan Mosley a lot. I'll pontificate by saying that this to me is what Georgia sort of provides. Elite level program. I'm talking about the state of Georgia. Elite level program, college level coach in Joey King. You know, you've worked with a college level quarterback in Julian Juju Lewis. Played on both sides of the ball, which I thought your insight on that was very interesting this week on Before the Hedges. We'll talk about that. But, you know, one of the reasons why I am very comfortable doing a lot of work recruiting in state, I just feel like the level of, training and competition and just the daily grind in Georgia is very high level. Honestly, you know, Carrollton's got better, facilities than a lot of teams in the ACC do. This is the sort of in-state recruiting that I'm always going to be extraordinarily comfortable with. I also thought you were interesting with your insight that you believe that Mosley could come to Georgia and at least from a technical standpoint, sort of compete on both sides of the ball, primarily as a wide receiver, some at defensive back. Tell me more about Mosley, if you don't mind.
Yeah, Brandon. So you and I have been doing a few of these Fridays together and spanning probably almost 10 years now. And here's one thing, I do this a lot now with my experience covering Georgia recruiting is whenever my ears perk up and I go, haven't seen that before. That's kind of an outlier, an anomaly. I'm like, that's news. That's a pretty big story. And Brandon will admit that Georgia has done this, pitched both sides of the ball, maybe with a few elite guys, maybe with like that elite corner, such as a Travis Hunter, and say, yeah, sure, you can play wide receiver. But it kind of felt like maybe a dangling carrot, like, oh, we'll see. This one's different with Ryan Mosley for two reasons. Number one is you literally have Travaris Robinson and James Cooley recruiting him hard, prioritizing him hard at both sides. And there has been a plan drawn up that says, hey, you're largely going to be a wide receiver. But then on defense, when it's third down, it's nickel, it's dime, we're going to want to see you maybe work for us at safety eventually because he's 6'4", he's 205 pounds, he's very rangy. He can kind of cover the field really well, cover half of the field really well. And that's something, Brandon, we haven't seen a lot or heard a lot. And I think the reason why is, Brandon, all this time we talk about money, we talk about resources, we talk about cap, we talk about salary. So if you can get a guy that's probably going to be a early contributor at wide receiver, but might also be maybe a depth guy at safety, and he can do both, and he can rep both on your roster, I think that's a win for both sides because now you got to make all those revenue sharing slots stick, and you got to extend them, and you got to spread it around, kind of like the family budget, right? So what you're doing there is you're, instead of having to go get another safety, even though, Brandon, we must admit, it seems like Georgia's going to sign 7 safeties in this class, or at least 7 safety projectable players in this class. So it's really interesting to hear this about Mosley because, number one, he's receptive to it. And number two, Georgia has looked the part and walked the walk, not just talk the talk about, hey, we both want you for our rooms. Did you see those recruiting pictures, Brandon? There was one of them that was a recreation of a very viral photo in a recording studio. And it usually had the one that it was depicted off of had 2 hip hop artists in the picture. But in this one, he has both James Coley and he has both T-Rob in the picture. When he was at Georgia for an unofficial visit for junior day back in January for the basketball game, when Georgia played Auburn, his pictures courtside had T-Rob and Coley in that picture. So, Brandon, everything the way it points to me is this is a guy Georgia thinks can contribute on both sides.
So I want to follow up on that because, I mean, on the one hand, Mosley brings the sort of size quotient that gives him a chance to truly play both sides of the ball. For instance, compare that like, say, Sokovia White from a couple of years ago. Just knowing people kind of close to Sokovia, he would have gladly also played, defensive back or maybe even played primarily defensive back at Georgia. But his size profile just sort of fit receiver better. In the case of Mosley, my understanding is he's already 200 pounds. He's pretty tall. And so, therefore, this is a guy that you do feel comfortable playing at defensive back in addition to offense. So my question is, okay, the fact that we're even having this conversation, is this just because of the unique sort of skill set that Mosley possesses? Is this one of the things that's just more of an imperative in this day and age in college football when you got to maximize the value of roster spots? Is this the kind of thing that people are going to do more of because we just saw Travis Hunter play both sides of the ball at Colorado? Like, is this a story specific to Mosley or is this some sort of trend?
I think it's kind of both. I think you have a unique player there, Brandon. Here's why I say this. I think Ryan Mosley, and we've kind of said or reported that we've been told that Ryan was silent for some time. It's not like Georgia needed to come up with this unique little pitch to earn the commitment. He's always told me Georgia was home. Brandon, I don't know if you saw the OG old school video, that commitment video that he dropped. Actually, it dropped after the commitment was made on the social platforms. But he was in a red Georgia IMP ALA and Impala, really classic, really sporty car. He's on the top of a parking deck looking over a skyline. And I love that picture. We even got a laugh, or we got a how cute out of Miss Mansell about it when I showed him the picture of Ryan kind of playing rec league ball, and he was wearing basically a full fit Georgia 34 red and black growing up. Had the G's where they needed to be and everything else. I mean, this was a recruitment, Brandon, that he's a special football player. He's been in a productive offense with a future college starting quarterback in Juju Lewis at Carrollton. Joey King knows what he's doing with ball plays and coaching up ball on the offensive side of the ball at Carrollton. And this is a guy that has produced at the highest levels. And when we saw him take one to the house early on against Grayson in the 6A state title game. So there's a lot to like about Ryan. And I don't think Georgia had to get clever with it. They just saw a very unique athlete, and they saw a body type that he can get it done. And hey, it's going to help the economics and the balance sheet in the long run as well.
Jeff, great stuff. We certainly appreciate that. We hope you have a great weekend. We'll look forward to reading all of your coverage of all of these visitors coming to DawgNation.com. More on guys like Ryan Mosley, too. And who knows, maybe more commitments to discuss in the very near future as well. Thank you for your time. And we'll talk to you soon right here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
ABA, buddy. Take it easy. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So I promise you, before we're done on today's show, I want to get more into the Diamond Dogs. Obviously getting ready for a great NCAA regional. Great recruiting stuff from Jeff Sentell right there, too. I want to get more into what's going to go on with Georgia baseball here this weekend. But we got some SEC business to take care of, including cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And speaking of business, no better business for you to take care of here, whether it's this summer or heading towards the fall, even making your plans for 2026 travel. No better way to do that right now than with Royal Caribbean and all of the great things they have going on. Obviously, you got the debut of Star of the Seas coming up here very soon. This August, that's set sail. Looking forward to my chance to hopefully be a part of that and come back and tell you all the really cool things. When Icon of the Seas, debuted back a couple of Januaries ago, or I guess was that this January? Boy, time flies. Either way, when it debuted, a lot of attention around like being, and we can bring that music down just slightly if you want to, but a lot of attention being paid to the largest cruise ship in the world, and that's really, really cool. But really the thing about Icon is the way in which it introduced new neighborhoods, new concepts, restaurant, bars, lounges, spaces on the ship. introducing those kinds of things is one of the things that it made Icon so much fun. And what I can't wait to see, some of this we have some idea of, some of this I think we're still waiting to learn. What I can't wait to see is for Star of the Seas, when it shows up in August, how much of this is going to be kind of rerunning some of the stuff that Icon made famous, and how much of this is going to be introducing even new concepts that Icon didn't even have. I can't wait to see that. I'm looking forward to that. Of course, when it comes to a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, the person I'm always trusting is the travel advisor recommended to me by Royal Caribbean. That's Jessica Slater. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can email her as well, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She'll tell you all of the great stuff that's going to be on Star of the Seas, all of your opportunity to do some great stuff with the Royal Caribbean here through the end of 2025 and into 2026. All right, let's talk about cruise around the SEC. A few headlines here for a moment, and let's begin with the Tennessee Vols and Tennessee fans being very unhappy right now about. So yesterday we got like 5 game time announcements for Georgia. Now, what's interesting is, just sort of a triviality, but nonetheless, all 5 of the game time announcements for Georgia, they're all 5 at 3:30. It's the customary time for Georgia, Florida, the Black Friday game between Georgia and Georgia Tech. It was a night game a year ago. This year at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, that's going to be 3:30. The 2 kind of early season non-conference kickoffs against Marshall and who's the other one? Austin Peay. They're both going to be 3:30. But the big one, and perhaps your eyes went straight here the same way mine did, we also found out that in mid-September, Georgia's trip to Knoxville, Tennessee, will also be a 3:30 start. And let me tell you, Tennessee fans are just so unhappy about this. How could they not get the night game for the big game between Georgia and Tennessee? Well, and I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news. This is one of those sort of honesty compels me to admit. I think the problem for Tennessee is the primetime game can't be guaranteed to go to you because you have sort of proven yourself to be a not ready for primetime program. And that's one of those things where you say that, it kind of comes across as trolling, and I would never intentionally troll anybody. But also we can't shy away from the truth. We have to be honest. You know, we have to display extraordinary candor. And this is one of those situations where you sort of feel like you have to just sort of tell the truth, that primetime games, typically speaking, reserved for ready for primetime programs. And you can't just benefit on the Georgia brand as your ticket to the night game against Georgia. Obviously, people believe that night games are better. Tennessee fans have a lot longer to sip on those clear jars and things like that. You have a more raucous environment, perhaps there at Neyland Stadium for that. But Georgia's brand alone, Georgia's history of success in the Kirby Smart era alone, is not going to be enough to get you that night game primetime spot. If you wanted that, you probably needed to do something in recent years to make the TV executives believe you have some chance of being competitive with Georgia, because they're going to save those night games for the games they think have a chance to be close. And if you watched Georgia-Tennessee last year in Athens, or the year before that in Knoxville, or the year before that in Athens, or going back to Knoxville the year before that, I mean, you have to have a little gray in your hair, a little, little age in your face to even really remember a time in which, Tennessee was kind of giving it to Georgia. It's been a long time since we've seen Tennessee have success in this series, longer than the TV executives have any real memory of. So Georgia and Tennessee will be playing at 3:30 there in that particular spot. Now, listen, road games in the SEC are tough. Anything can change. But I think, unfortunately for Tennessee, and I know that's a delicate fan base, but I think, unfortunately for Tennessee, the game time announcement for your big home game against Georgia, I just think that's a little bit of a confirmation about what your current status is in college football right now. Had you not gone to Ohio State and embarrassed yourself in the playoff, things might have been a little different, but you did, and so this is what you have to live with there on that. So let me shift gears to this, and this could be good news for Georgia legend. It certainly looks like there's a rule change coming. And I won't pretend to be an expert on all this. I'm not always great with small details, but there is a established list of criteria to make the College Football Hall of Fame. And for coaches, there's like a certain number of years you have to be a head coach and a certain number of like a winning percentage they have to have. It's all fairly, I would say, like legalistic and tedious. And the end result has been that a lot of figures we would say worthy of Hall of Fame induction have been kind of excluded from the Hall of Fame for fairly mundane reasons. Now, nationally, this story, because what looks like it's going to happen is the rules are going to be relaxed, the standard's going to change, and that's going to open the door for some folks to get into the Hall of Fame who haven't been in that are probably deserving. Nationally, the name that's going to get the most attention is Mike Leach. Obviously, Coach Leach, taken from us way too soon a couple of years ago, and when you think about his offensive innovation in college football, feels like the kind of guy that's probably supposed to be in the College Football Hall of Fame. So nationally, he's going to get a lot of attention. But also, another guy that's going to get attention here locally is Irk Russell. Russell we love because he was the legendary former Georgia defensive coordinator. We have a great image of him on the screen. For those of you watching on video, famous for he would do like headbutts with players wearing their helmets before the game began. And so he'd have just blood trickling down his face like he was an old, Georgia championship wrestling type wrestler or something like that. That's what he would, that's what he would always do. He's famous for that. Kind of the architect of the Junkyard Dog defense for Georgia. And we've cited him on the show a good number of times over the years just for his connection to Georgia's football history. Goes on to be a head coach at Georgia Southern and really made that into an FCS power. Back then we call it 1AA, kind of a 1AA power. Obviously deserving of being in the College Football Hall of Fame, but the previous legalistic interpretation of their own procedures excluded him from being in. Sounds like that's about to change, and we would say that is very good news. Now, let me also finish with this when it comes to cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. We talked a little earlier in the show about the SEC kind of going on the offensive, about its perspective, about what any kind of future college ball playoff expansion should look like, and the deference the SEC should get for just playing tougher schedules, having a larger number of quality teams, and therefore, as the SEC called it, a scheduling gauntlet unlike anything else in college football. And we cited specific data on our show yesterday, kind of ironically, as a lead-in to what the SEC itself would say. We cited some of that yesterday coming from Bill Conley, SP Plus on ESPN, who says even with an 8-game conference schedule, the SEC still has far more difficult schedules than the Big Ten because of the fact that essentially everybody in the SEC is among the top 50 teams. I think 13 of the 16 sort of rate analytically as a top 50 team in college football, whereas a much smaller number of Big Ten teams actually do that. The Big Ten is just an easier path than the SEC. The data, I think, without equivocation, proves that to be true. And so yesterday, the SEC kind of came out swinging and providing some of this, which we like. We like the SEC on the attack, going on the offensive when it comes to these sorts of things. But boy, oh boy, there was all kinds of media stuff. Now, most of these guys aren't very famous. They frankly have smaller platforms than we do here, so you probably don't know who most of these people are. But there was a lot of stuff, especially on like the X platform and things like that. A lot of attacking the SEC, kind of almost even mocking the SEC as saying it doesn't quite realize that things have changed and somehow history began 18 months ago when Michigan cheated its way to a national title, and the Big Ten sort of been on top of college football ever since, and this sort of relatively recent phenomenon is going to be an ever-occurring phenomenon in perpetuity moving forward. The Big Ten is just better than the SEC. The SEC needs to get with the program, that it doesn't dominate college football anymore. I put this out on X yesterday, and I'll put this out here right now. This is what I think is interesting about this sort of SEC versus media squabbling. First of all, there have been some people who wonder, Well, the SEC is out there speaking very loudly right now about its perspective about what it wants college football playoff expansion to be. How come the Big Ten is so quiet? I would suggest that one of the reasons why the Big Ten doesn't make much of an argument in situations like this is it doesn't really feel like it needs to. The Big Ten's got the media working on its behalf, so therefore it already has a fairly loud mouthpiece to make its case for it. The Big Ten doesn't need to stand in the way of the media, which is kind of already doing the Big Ten's job for it. I would say there's at least one perspective that would suggest that's true. But also when it comes to like the media's role, I'm here talking about national media and let's say like kind of legacy, traditional media types, and the sort of SEC or the other leagues. Have you ever noticed this? I find this to be fascinating. That you see, obviously shows like this that do admittedly come from a pro SEC perspective. We are a show that exists to serve an audience that doesn't historically get served very well by legacy media. That's why we exist. That's why we've been successful. We saw a hole in the market and we found a market in the hole. That is our story, sort of full stop. We were just simply willing and able to do what other legacy media wasn't necessarily as willing and able to do. And so therefore you have this sort of pro SEC media that does exist. And as a counterbalance to that, you see sort of a faction in the national media that is becoming more and more like anti-SEC. There's been a lot of criticism, for instance, of the SEC this week, more so than just the regular Danny Kanell and stuff like that. Kanell we don't dislike. We think it's kind of funny. We like pro wrestling style shtick in sort of the hot take space in sports. I have a fairly high tolerance for that. But people who would consider themselves to be more objective and more serious, they also have sort of sounded a lot like Danny Kanell as of late. And I just kind of find that to be fascinating. And the specific reason I find it fascinating is this. Have you ever noticed that for those who are convinced that the SEC's era of dominance is sort of a past tense thing, it's existing in some bygone era, 18 months ago is a long time ago now, it exists in some bygone era, then how come they don't just talk about the other leagues? Like even the non-SEC content in college football still kind of comes from an SEC slant. Like there is pro-SEC discussion, a show like this might do that, and there is anti-SEC discussion. But even in sort of non-SEC spaces, you don't see a lot of content, whether it be written or spoken or whatever. You don't see a lot of content in which the SEC isn't the center of the discussion, even when it's sort of a non-SEC type thing. For instance, back in the college football playoff a year ago, there was a lot of talk about the SEC not being there from people who seemed really happy that the SEC wasn't there. I'm talking about deep, late in the playoff, national championship game, things like that. But if the SEC is so, past tense, if it's such old news, how come you don't just create content, shows, written pieces, things like that? How come you don't just create content about the new hotness, Big Ten or the ACC or whatever else? The fact that there's so little of that, I find to be kind of interesting. And I think it tells you something. I'll let you decide for yourself what you think it tells. But for now, we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, here on Fridays in our show, we always love the chance to do a Long Finnish presented by the Finnish Long Drink. And I would say that for this particular week, we're even more excited about it than normal because, A, the long drink goes great on a summer weekend. We love that. But also because it is a big weekend around UGA for reasons that have nothing to do with football. It's obviously the start of the NCAA Regional. I'm speaking to you live here right now just after 11 a.m. Eastern Time. That means we're inside of an hour from Georgia. Now, speaking of unattractive game starts, Georgia baseball gets its chance to deal with that today. The host in the Regional relegated to the noon start. How that works out, not quite sure. But nonetheless, that's Georgia's story today against Binghamton. And then we hope a long run to Georgia all the way to Omaha after that. I thought it was really good earlier this week to get a chance to hear from Georgia coach Wes Johnson on the subject of, transfer portal is a very real thing in this day and age. That means for Georgia, who made a run all the way into the Super Regionals a year ago, they do have some experience coming back from that team. Obviously, a lot of the big names, such as Charlie Condon, no longer here. But there's also a balance of guys on this Georgia roster who will be going into an NCAA postseason for the very first time as well. And so he's managing all of that while also making sure everybody understands that no matter how well you've done during the regular season, It all starts fresh and new right now. This is really good from Wes Johnson as a part of our Long Finish presented by the Finnish Long Drink.
Especially the guys that were on the team last year, Colby, Slade, Layton, Colton Smith, Zach Harris, all those guys through. I mean, there's others as well, but I mean, Henry Hunter. I think it's just good for we've got some guys who don't have any postseason experience that'll play tomorrow, Robbie Burnett, Zabo, those guys. And so they're able to draw on it, give the guys kind of what they're, going to expect. The crowd, just, the intensity. I think the other big thing is, as I talk to a lot of teams about, the board's clean, right? I mean, just understanding that records don't matter, who you're playing doesn't matter. Everybody's going to come out and they've got a fresh start, so you're going to get everybody's best effort.
I think that's the point that Johnson makes at the end there is so crucial. That, okay, Georgia's the 7th seed nationally out of 64 teams. It's the host for the regional. It's the host for the super regional. But here's the deal. Being the favorite and being the sort of host team, the national seed, that can feel like a very small thing in baseball very, very quickly. I think I saw the stat, I gave this to our video audience a little earlier, that 4 of the top 80 teams in America from a home run standpoint, I think this is right, are playing in this Athens regional. That means that, hey, if the ball goes out of the ballpark in the early innings and all of a sudden you got a deficit, the fact that you're, RPI number 1, national seed number 7, home team throughout, all of a sudden that matters very, very little if you find yourself facing a deficit during a game, and it would not be an impossibility for Georgia to see that against Binghamton or against either Duke or Oklahoma State or anybody else. So what Johnson's saying there, I think is appropriate, is that Georgia on paper is, I would say, the far better team of anybody in this Athens regional. I would say on paper they'll be better than, even if it's Ole Miss, they'll be better than the team they would likely face in the super regional. But baseball is a very funny sport, and it sort of matters what happens in the 9 innings today and then anything after that. There is a lot of tension and pressure on baseball, even if you are on paper the favored team. And so I don't think that's lip service. I do think that's a very real foreshadowing of just how tense it's about to be for those of us who hope to see Georgia go on a long run in this postseason, perhaps getting back to Omaha in the College World Series. Wouldn't that be a fun thing to see? That's also our Finnish Long Drink presented today by, our Long Finish presented by the Finnish Long Drink. And so maybe you're sitting around the pool today listening to Georgia, watching them on the devices, whatever else. Well, as you're enjoying all of that or whatever you have planned this summer, Finnish Long Drink, great way to enjoy it. You like the Long Drink Pineapple. A lot of folks like the peach-flavored version, the peach date for a limited time. Long Drink Cranberry, Long Drink Zero, no carbs, no sugar. All kinds of fun stuff. All kinds of great varieties. It's out there for you. In fact, if you go to the website, thelongdrink.com, you can find out about the story of kind of how this great ready-to-drink cocktail kind of got its start in Finland. Great backstory here. Summer games were in Helsinki back in the 1950s. That's sort of the origin story. Then it comes to America. It makes its way here to Georgia. DawgNation loves it. And you can kind of hear all about that. And you can also put in your zip code. And if you've never tried some before, you can find out where to pick some up. Or if you're ready to try some again, once again, whether it be a golf course, a bar, all kinds of cool things like that, all around wherever you are, all across the great state of Georgia. So it's online at thelongdrink.com. And we get ready to wrap up here today. Let's get ready to give you a golden shoe today as well. Obviously, we're a lot of excitement and fun when it comes to the Georgia Bulldogs. The Diamond Dogs getting ready to make their run through the NCAA tournament. We're, of course, excited about all of that. Yeah, there you go. We can just go without music for right now. It doesn't matter. So we'll give a golden shout to the Diamond Dogs there for that. Game day coming up today. Noon start against Binghamton. I'd also invite you to check out Baseball UGA on X or any of the social platforms, I'm assuming. I thought they also put together a really fun hype video for this, which I thought was really good. Kind of looked at some of the recent moments in Georgia baseball history, kind of exciting times of postseason success in the past. A lot of that kind of from the early part of the 21st century. But Georgia kind of ready to kind of rewrite and sort of I guess, recontinue some of that history here in this particular postseason. So we're very excited about that. So we'll give the Diamond Dogs a golden shoe for you here today. How about lousy, stinking Gators? Gator hater updater, long time since Florida's beaten Georgia in football, and we love the fact that that continues on. How about 1,665 days? That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That is our Gator hater updater. You'll have a great weekend. We'll see you back here Monday. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs, they show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that. We'll get ready to get your comments going here. A lot of really fun stuff. We'll check in with the YouTube side here first. We'll see how people are doing there. Jeff Sentell, by the way, pops into our YouTube comments. Like we were talking about Jay Lamar a little earlier. Jeff says there had been some chatter. I think it's one of those things where you sort of, I probably hear about 60% of what's intended for me. But there had been some chatter that Lamar might visit this weekend. Sounds like, according to Jeff, it looks like Lamar is going to visit Georgia June 20th. That the information coming from Jeff Sentell here. A June 20th visit now for Jay Lamar. Frank Patterson, by the way, excited about the possibility that the Baltimore Ravens may sign Nick Chubb. There was a really good video this week with the Ravens and Malachi Starks. They're really seemingly very impressed with him right now. And I guess as Nick Chubb looks for a new team, maybe the Ravens might be an option. Although there's also an ongoing battle on our YouTube comment section because of, we got G. Grace, the Bama fan, who's obviously big into Derrick Henry. Nobody loves running backs more than our guy Frankie Patterson, and so you could have some battle lines being drawn over that. By the way, how great is it to have Jeff kind of popping into the comment section to provide some of that recruiting information? Really good stuff on that. Really good stuff. Michael Castleberry, thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that. Foster Moss going back to the old Will Anderson recruitment. I mean, it's kind of funny. It's like Georgia, for a good number of years, cleaned house and got everybody. And, now we kind of live in an NIL age where it seems like there's a little bit more parity about where the top players go. And you've got these, sometimes doofuses in the national media who are like, Georgia can't get everybody anymore. They were used to getting every recruit they wanted. They can't get everybody. But those of us who are like, face first in this all the time can also say, well, listen, Georgia's never quite gotten everybody it wanted. And there's always going to be a list of guys that sort of get away. And certainly the Anderson recruitment's maybe an example of that. By the way, Mike D. bragging that Jeff, when he dropped extra information, chose to go to the YouTube comment section to do that, which is very funny. Very funny. Let's see what else. Spencer Clark says, who would you rather have between Bowman and Prothrow? Yeah, I can't necessarily pick between those two because I like them for different reasons. I do think that Bowman is probably more polished right now. I do think that. I think that Prothrow is the sort of rare athlete that you would always bet on that high ceiling if you wouldn't get a chance to. So that's my sort of differentiation between those two. By the way, good to see Miriam Corbin checking in on YouTube today. I don't know if that means that Facebook's in trouble. Sometimes we have glitches over there. She checks in to say, I'm so glad to see Sankey finally exerting our obvious superiority over the other leagues. Yeah, we actually predicted this a lot in the recent past, but at least a lot last summer. We said, this is what's coming. There's going to be more arguing around college football. And it is going to be very partisan between the kind of pro-SEC and pro-Big Ten factions. And some of this is more than just who wins the games. The SEC and the Big Ten, in recent past, in the near future, I would say they also have fairly different visions for what college athletics should be. Very different visions. So when you choose your side in kind of an SEC Big Ten debate, you're not just, choosing that based on who your favorite team is, but you're also sort of choosing that based on what you want to see college athletics look like. Because if you gave Greg Sankey sort of autocratic power. And if you gave Tony Petitti sort of autocratic power, and they were influenced by their university presidents, of course, that's not totally autocratic, I don't guess. But if you gave, like, the point is the SEC and the Big Ten vision for the future, I would say, stand in pretty sharp contrast. Spencer Clark, thank you for the kind words. Appreciate that. Kirby's Belt shouts out the Diamond Dogs. I love that. Let me go to DawgNation.com here for a minute. Let's see what else is going on here. At DawgNation.com. By the way, DT's at a doctor's appointment today, but he's checking in here at DawgNation.com. DT, I'm glad you're here. Hope the doctor's appointment goes well. Bill Camacho on the subject of the College Game Day crew coming to Athens this year. Listen, it's the kind of home schedule that certainly gives you a good chance to do that. Let's see what. Oh, yeah, by the way, UGA Marine mentioned, we didn't talk about this, that court storming and field storming in the SEC is now a straight $500,000 fine. I don't like talking about this. I just kind of find the whole thing to be a little bit boring. Maybe we should have talked about it because it's, decent news. It's one of those things where I do sort of get why you don't want this. It's one of those things that TV has incentivized so much because it's kind of the money shot at the end of a game, especially in college basketball, where, the home team, like in college basketball, the home team's just, you could trick yourself into believing a road team has never won a basketball game because it seems like every time you're watching like the old school Big Monday on ESPN, or, we just sort of grew up with these college basketball games. Home team always pulls the upset. Crowd always storms the floor. That's how the broadcast goes off the air. So for a long time, ESPN has really incentivized this. It is kind of dangerous. I do get that. Now, it's not, storming the field's fault that so-and-so punched a woman or whoever did the whatever else. Like, that's personal responsibility. At some point in time becomes an issue to consider there on that. But I can tell you this. I remember it's been probably 20 years. It's been more than 20 years ago. Back when Tennessee was good at basketball in previous era. Still weren't good at football back then, but they were good at basketball. Y'all remember Ron Slay? So Slay is on the SEC network now as a commentator. He's got a pretty big personality. He had a big personality as a player back then. So Georgia upset Tennessee. I think you'd say it was an upset. Georgia upset Tennessee. Crowd stormed the court. And it was an odd scene. Nothing bad ended up happening. But you have this situation where Slay, who was a pretty, kind of edgy player, I would say. Tennessee fans would probably say that too. You had Slay kind of standing by himself, and all these Georgia fans were standing all around him. Like, student section storms the floor. I remember this so vividly. Like I said, nothing happened. Slay was able to get off the court. Georgia fans allowed him to kind of pass through. But, think about this. Anytime you've ever competed in anything athletically, you're going to be a little hot-headed when it's over with. That's just the nature of competition. It sort of creates a little bit of, like, I can't think of a better way to say it. It was a little hot-headed. You're just kind of hot-headed, right? It's why in the NFL you have a cool-down period before players talk to the media. In most forms of competition, even like, church league softball, there's still a little bit of hot-headedness associated with the competition. There just is. And so you got hot-headed guy on the court, drunk students all around him, and I'm thinking, gosh, it's a recipe for disaster. But it ended up not being that way. And there are also other things that kind of happen like that. So I do get why court storming, field storming is pretty dangerous. I do get that. I also, the secret that they don't like to know is like, if the whole student body is coming on the court or coming on the field, there is nobody stopping them. Now, if it's a few people, you're probably gonna get arrested. But if it's the whole student body, it's a hard thing to stop. So that's obviously, they're trying to kind of find ways to do it. Georgia last year for basketball got very creative in preventing the court storming and things like that. And I'm not trying to be critical because I understand why they were doing what they were doing. Constant announcements and like trying to, give sort of like incentives to students to not do it. But honestly, I thought it kind of ruined the vibe near the end of some of the games. And it was the Florida game, right? Where it's not even obvious that Georgia's going to win this game. And you got the PA announcer, please do not storm the floor and the game is over. I'm just telling you right now, Georgia was not the only SEC team that dealt with this. This is going to end in an embarrassing fashion for somebody next year or sometime soon, because you've got the court storm warnings going out while the favored visiting team is still alive to be able to win it. And it's just going to be embarrassing when, you have a series of court storming warnings and then the road team comes back and wins the game. And then social media goes crazy about, I guess there's no court storming now. I don't know. That's why I don't like talking about it. Johnny Prescott says he likes story time with BA. I guess every now and then it does kind of turn into that. Senior Dog 54 mentioning Emerson Hancock with the Mariners. You kind of wonder, do we eventually see, I'm guessing probably not. I do think he's in high A now. Do we see Charlie Condon with the Rockies at some point in this season? Y'all, we just had a situation where the White Sox were in competition, in discussion to be the worst team of all time. And lo and behold, if these Rockies aren't even worse. Like, that's amazing to me. That is amazing to me, how bad they are. You wonder if Charlie Condon gets a chance to come up. At this point, I'm not even sure he wants to. UGA Marine on the subject of, because of the Isle of Man qualifying, it's a motorcycle race. That's really interesting. Are you participating in it? That's really interesting. Really interesting. I'll go back to Facebook here in a minute. D. Nelly points out something that's always been a point of pride for me. In my entire life, I think I'm right about this. At home, anyway, Georgia has only stormed the field one time. That was Tennessee in 2000. And you want to talk about nearly an absolute disaster. And we've done this before on the show. This is pre-social media. It's sort of early days of the internet. This would have been such a big deal just a few years later. Even a few years later, this has been a big deal. Georgia fans were running on the field. The game wasn't over. Tennessee was only losing by 15 points, and they had the football. If they had scored a touchdown, they'd be going for an onside kick to make it a one-possession game. And Georgia fans were tearing down the end zone on the side of the field that Tennessee was driving to. And then Tim Wansley got an interception, and then the interception prompted a full-scale, just onslaught onto the field. It's one of those deals where, this could have been so embarrassing. And we had, an example of that a few years later with Kentucky storming the field against LSU, did it too soon, had to pull the students off the field, then LSU just won the game. So we do have some precedent for, a premature field storm, and it ended up being embarrassing. I'm just telling you. And listen, I get sort of mob mentality sort of takes over at some point in time. It's even semi-embarrassing that Georgia stormed the field in 2000, because a footnote to that is Tennessee Georgia had not beaten Tennessee in forever in 2000, had not beaten them in forever. So that was kind of the deal, long losing streak. But the footnote to that is Tennessee had lost the previous week. It's not like this was the number one ranked Tennessee Vols. They had lost, I think it was to LSU, the previous week. Yes, I'm telling you, for those of you who are young, way younger than me, Georgia football used to be wild. College football in general used to just be wild. When I was a kid, if Georgia scored a touchdown, these are adults, mind you, the people in the upper level would throw they were the Poss Cokes, the little Coke cups from the concession stand. They just throw them from the upper level. So I'm a child holding my head like this after Georgia scored a touchdown because people were throwing things off the upper level. We didn't have any sense back then. I mean, it was just lawless, just lawless. Let's see what else. Foster Moss says an SEC team could beat the Rockies. Honestly, I mean, that's always like the worst cliche ever when it comes to like the NFL team, the college football team. That couldn't happen. NBA could not happen. Worst NBA team would beat every college team. Worst NFL team would beat every college team in any year. If the Rockies played one of these SEC, if the Rockies played, like, say, Arkansas, Vanderbilt, something like that, it's not a given they would win that game. It's absolutely not a given they'd win that game. Probably would, but not a given. I'll tell you why, especially if you play with aluminum bats. If you play with aluminum bats, like the other, I'm sure this is hopefully changed by now. The other night when the Braves were playing in Colorado, this is much earlier in the season, when the Braves were playing in Colorado, the starting pitcher, who I'd never heard of for them, was allowing base runners on like 40-something% of his at-bats. 40-something% of the batters he was facing, they were getting on base. That's not great in like youth league. I mean, like you would ask, a 12-year-old, 13-year-old pitcher, you would hope they would have a better ratio of on base than that. You're not going to win very many games at like the youth league level if you're surrendering base runners 40-something% of the time. Like you can't. It goes without saying you can't do that in Major League Baseball. So as much contact as Rockies pitchers are allowing, under the right circumstances, I do think an SEC team might be able to beat them, at least in one game.
So they have just announced first pitch delayed indefinitely in Athens due to incoming weather. More details.
What's the point of the turf if you're going to get? Is it raining? I'm obviously in a box.
Yeah, there's supposed to be bad weather coming through. So.
Oh well, gosh, man. Started the show, such a good mood. Baseball coming up later on today, and now we don't know when the game's going to be. That's so disappointing. Is the weather? Because like I said, I'm in a box here in the studio. Is the weather? I guess sounds like it's bad. I thought it was getting better. Let me go to Facebook for a moment. Let's see what's going on over there. Y'all give me 1 second. I'm sorry. And then we'll get you on to your weekend. And whenever the Diamond Dogs do play, you'll be ready for it, I'm sure. Following UGA recruiting. By the way, Jeff Sentell jumped in the comment section a little early to let us know that Jay Lamar visiting June 20th now. All right. Ooh, Ralph Price, interesting point. He says the only reason Ohio State won the national title is because of the SEC players they got out of the transfer portal. Thinking about Quinshon Judkins, thinking about Caleb Downs. That's interesting. And, we said this the other day, like Brian Kelly, just, completely objectionable comments this week. He said, we want the Big Ten. We said the other day, like, you ain't a part of we with us yet because part of the reason the SEC's reputation has been diminished somewhat because of the fact that 3 years in a row you've lost a non-conference game in week one to Florida State, USC. So Brian Kelly needs to not talk about anything related to Big Ten versus SEC squabbling until he does something to contribute positively to the brand. That's step one. But step two, who was the commenter that said this? Ralph Price. This is how you do it. You don't surrender anything willingly in an argument. You never, ever surrender any ground willingly in an argument. You may not have the winning side, but you're not going to do the other side's arguing for it. You're just not going to do that. And Brian Kelly clearly did not go to that school because earlier this week he's like, yeah, the Big Ten's got over on us right now. Don't give up on that. Don't surrender that turf. Do like our Ralph is here saying, Ohio State won with SEC players. Say that. They bought a national championship. Do you know how much they're bothered by that, by the way? Now, but among friends, I don't think that Ohio State necessarily bought a national title. I think they probably were the best team last year. Among friends, I'll say that. But if you're having an argument with an Ohio State fan, you bought a championship. You brought some SEC guys in to do the heavy lifting that you hadn't been capable of doing. Yeah, that's totally fair. I think that's a reasonable argument. You definitely should say. Now, this is true. Of the two Big Ten titles, as I said, I honestly, I mean, we picked Ohio State going into the playoff to win the national championship. We did, or at least to be in the national championship game. We did pick them to do that. We thought they were undervalued going in. So Ohio State did not sneak up on us. It did not sneak up on us here, even though everybody was very down on them after having lost to Michigan. We kind of saw right through that. But speaking of Michigan, when you see the anti-SEC bent that exists in the national media right now, I do think it becomes a little easier to understand why we've never quite gotten a fair hearing on exactly how much cheating Michigan was a part of on its way to a national championship. We've never really quite got much of an explanation on just how deep that ran. Now, we get these little token suspensions. We're going to have another one for the Michigan Sherrone Moore this year. Harbaugh took a suspension. University president's getting ready to leave. Boy, it certainly seems like Michigan acts guilty, but we've never had much of an elocution about exactly how guilty they really are. These are the things you notice. You notice. I am perpetually noticing things. Jamie Huff says, why chase out-of-state running backs? I thought we got enough chasing Milton, and then we had Jahmyr Gibbs wanting to be a dog. That was the old criticism, that Georgia did not do enough when it comes to the in-state running back. Now, whether that was fair or not, I guess is, an old argument perhaps. But there was some chatter about a little too much, on the out-of-state running backs. But in all honesty, the other thing about, kind of old running back topics, if you think about it over the years, the running backs that we sort of lamented, and I don't take pleasure in saying this is just true, the running backs we lamented Georgia not getting, almost none of them ever really did anything. Now, Jahmyr Gibbs, that's just a swing. I mean, look, that's just a swing and a miss. You're going to have some of those. Will Anderson, Jahmyr Gibbs, and, in this case, these are big swings and misses. These are big swings and misses. But the only reason why you even remember them is because they're big swings and misses. But when you cast as wide a net as Georgia does for many years as it has, you're going to have, you're going to have a misavow. You're going to have a guy you didn't give enough attention to early on in the process. And a lot of these really, competitive recruits, sometimes have memories about stuff like that. That's just going to happen every now and then. Frank Patterson says, how many games you got horns down dropping this year? Admittedly, not as many as I'd like. Now, I can think of a specific date in November that I think is going to be pretty tough for them. But listen, somehow Texas has sort of figured out the schedule game here in the SEC. For as much as Greg Sankey, we're on his side with this, about the rigorous strength of schedule, we would say, how about you spread some of that over to Austin? We would say that to Greg Sankey. Maybe we can kind of give some of that over to Texas. I do think that Texas is probably among the best teams in the country here this year. So probably not losing as many games as we'd like. Mike D says, call me Cena, can't see me. I don't know if that's a reference to me not reading one of his comments or not, but what do we think of the John Cena heel era? Seems a little underwhelming. I do have a low-key conspiracy theory. Seems pretty obvious to me in retrospect. They turned Cena heel earlier they intended to. That the whole thing of, turning on Cody Rhodes, stuff like that, it seems like maybe that was supposed to happen at WrestleMania. And I think they decided to do it early, getting The Rock involved, as a way of building hype for WrestleMania. I'd say the whole Cena heel turn, a little underwhelming, and not in the category of Hulk Hogan. So there you go. When Hogan turned in, NWO in 95 or 96, whatever year that was, not in the same category. Oh, Mike, yeah. Mike D says he's just back here today after having not been. Well, listen, Mike D, we're glad you're here. We are glad you are here. Yeah, Barry Watkins also on Facebook reminding us a weather delay for Georgia baseball. Boy, this weather's terrible. Just absolutely horrendous. Can we get some summertime? What else? Ken Holcomb says that storming the field is wrong for many reasons, especially, and boy, we talked about this forever at the time. We had a whole, cottage industry around. I do not understand. And Vanderbilt, by the way, did the same thing, I think. I do not understand the tearing down of the goalposts. And Kent was just talking about this, and then throwing it into your own river. I don't understand that. Like, why would you, if you've been to Knoxville, the only pretty thing about Knoxville is the Tennessee River, by the way. Announcements to come on that front. The only pretty thing about Knoxville is the Tennessee River. Why would you pollute the one thing you have going for you? I don't understand that. You take the goalpost, you march it out of the stadium, and then you're going to dump it in your river. That doesn't make any sense to me. Which, by the way, last year, unfortunately, in Oxford, when Ole Miss just gave it to Georgia. That was an awful game. And then I'm doing the post-game show after the game. It's raining, it's a mess. And so the Ole Miss students tear down the goalpost. It's the funniest thing. Once they tore it down, they couldn't figure out what to do with it. And, this is one of those things if you've ever been in the woods when a tree falls or something like that, it's way louder than you could ever imagine. A tree falling just sounds you just sort of think, it's a little, but it's not. It's a boom, thunderous when a tree falls. A goalpost is kind of the same way. That we sort of see goalposts our whole life. I don't think we realize goalposts are just massive structures. So when you tear it down, when it pops with some force and some authority. And the sort of main goalpost structure, that's a pretty tough thing to deal with. The point is, they tore it down, couldn't figure out what to do with it. So the whole time I'm doing the post-game show, I'm kind of watching this take place. It's a huge distraction. So they're marching this goalpost, trying to figure out how to get it out of the stadium. Finally, these moron students, I don't mean that negatively. I mean, just in this particular case, this was not the wisest choice. Start marching this goalpost up to the top of Vaught Hemingway Stadium. It's, kind of a lower bowl, so it's not super high, but it's high enough. It's a stadium. So they start marching this thing to the top. They're going to, in their mind anyway, they're going to dump this goalpost off the side of the stadium. Do you know what that would have done to the humans underneath this when that thing came crashing down? Catastrophe is not even a strong enough word for that, what that would have been. So thankfully somebody stepped in and prevented from doing that. But the point is, for all kinds of reasons, field storming and goalpost tearing down, probably not a good thing. G. Ray says that South Carolina said those islands in South Georgia belong to them in Florida. Come give them back. Let me tell you something. If South Carolina wants our coastal land, then come take it from us. Good luck trying that. All right, let us see what else. All right, we got to go. It's late. All right, so at some point in time today, it sounds like Georgia baseball will maybe play, although it sounds like the weather's pretty bad right now. But the whole point of having the turf field is it's supposed to absorb the rain, so we'll see if that can be the case. All right, we've got to go for now. Y'all have a great weekend. Check out RS Andrews, by the way. Speaking of weekends and great ones, don't let yours be ruined if your water heater goes out or if you have some sort of plumbing emergency. The RS in RS Andrews stands for Rapid Service. That means they can strike quickly to help you in your time of need. So don't let a plumbing emergency ruin your weekend. Find RS Andrews online and reach out to them to get what you need. It's rsandrews.com. That's rsandrews.com. All right, enjoy the baseball this weekend. Follow the recruiting stuff closely. Back here Monday, DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to talking to you then.